Inside the British monarchy, power is rarely loud. It does not need to be. It is communicated through posture, through silence, through tradition, and sometimes through something as small as a single piece of jewelry. Within the collections of the British royal family, jewels are not mere accessories. They are historical statements. They are symbols of continuity. They represent authority passed from one sovereign to the next. And according to a former royal jeweler who worked closely with the palace collection for decades, one particular piece became the quiet center of a delicate internal tension. This was not a public dispute. There were no headlines at the time, no official announcements, no confrontation recorded in history books. What happened unfolded behind palace doors, in conversations measured carefully and handled with precision. At the heart of it were two women. One was a reigning monarch, a woman who had defined stability for 70 years. Queen Elizabeth II. The other was a woman who had, over decades, moved from controversy to constitutional recognition. Camilla. To understand why a single jewel mattered, it is necessary to understand how royal jewelry functions within the crown. Unlike personal heirlooms in ordinary families, most major royal pieces are not privately owned. They form part of a larger historic collection held in trust for the nation. They belong to the crown, not to the individual wearing them. Each piece carries associations built over time. When a monarch repeatedly wears a certain brooch, necklace, or tiara, that item becomes visually and emotionally linked to her reign. The former royal jeweler described the piece in question as one of the most symbolically powerful items associated with Queen Elizabeth II. It was worn at key moments. It appeared in portraits that traveled the world. It was present during diplomatic receptions and historic milestones. Over time, it stopped being just a jewel. It became part of the Queen's identity. According to the jeweler, the interest from Camilla's circle was not framed as a demand. It was subtle, an inquiry, a review of archived pieces, a quiet question about availability for future formal use. Such reviews were not unusual. Senior royal women often had access to a range of pieces depending on occasion, rank, and approval. But when the jeweler saw the specific item included among those being discussed, he reportedly understood the sensitivity immediately. This was not just another tiara or brooch. This was something deeply associated with the sovereign herself. By the time this inquiry took place, Camilla's position within the monarchy had evolved significantly. Once viewed with skepticism by sections of the public, she had gradually taken on increasing responsibilities. She had accompanied the then Prince of Wales to state functions, supported charitable initiatives, and demonstrated loyalty to the institution. Eventually, she became Queen Consort, yet within royal protocol. Becoming Queen Consort does not automatically transfer every symbolic element of the reigning monarch's visual identity. The monarchy operates on nuance. Certain jewels are considered appropriate for rotation. Others are reserved, at least during the lifetime of a sovereign. When word reached Queen Elizabeth II that the piece had been included in discussions, the response was measured and decisive. There was no anger, no dramatic rejection. Instead, there was a clear directive that the item would not be reassigned. The jeweler later explained that such decisions were rarely personal. They were strategic. The Queen understood optics better than anyone. She knew how images shaped public perception. A jewel strongly identified with her reign, if worn by another senior royal during her lifetime, could invite interpretation. It could be seen as a signal of transition. It could suggest a symbolic passing of authority that had not yet occurred. For Queen Elizabeth II, continuity was paramount. She had ascended the throne in 1952 and witnessed dramatic change across decades. Political shifts, cultural revolutions, global crises. Through it all, her public image remained steady. The jewelry she wore became part of that steady presence. Allowing that particular piece to be worn by Camilla while she was still alive may have blurred lines the Queen preferred to keep distinct. It was not about denying Camilla's status. By then, Camilla's status was clearly defined. It was about preserving the visual language of monarchy. The royal jeweler described the piece as resting in secure storage, carefully maintained, documented, and preserved. Every royal jewel has a file. Dates worn, events attended, repairs completed, photographs archived. The history of this item was dense. Its association with Queen Elizabeth II was unmistakable. Camilla, for her part, had access to numerous extraordinary pieces. Over time, she wore significant tiaras and brooches from the royal collection. Some had been worn by previous queens. Others had rotated through generations of royal women. The refusal of this single piece did not diminish her formal role, but symbolically it marked a boundary. Royal symbolism operates in layers. The public may see glittering diamonds. Insiders see messaging. When a royal woman debuts a new piece at a state banquet, it is often carefully chosen. The choice can signal continuity with the past, alliance with nation, or respect for a predecessor. In this case, Queen Elizabeth II appeared to believe that one particular symbol of her reign should remain exclusively hers until a natural moment of transition. That moment would only come with the end of her reign itself. The jeweler reflected that Queen Elizabeth II had a deep understanding of gradual change. She introduced shifts in protocol slowly. She modernized aspects of the monarchy carefully. She allowed public perception to adjust step by step. Sudden symbolic gestures were not her style. For Camilla, the path to acceptance had also been gradual. Her public image evolved over years of consistent service. By the time she became queen consort, much of the earlier controversy had softened. She had earned her place beside the king through steady work rather than dramatic declarations. Yet earning position and inheriting legacy are not identical processes. Legacy, especially within the British monarchy, unfolds through time and succession. It is anchored to reigns. Queen Elizabeth II's reign was one of the longest in history. Her visual symbols accumulated weight over 70 years. The refusal to release that jewel was, according to the jeweler, entirely consistent with how the queen managed her reign. She compartmentalized symbolism. She understood that certain objects carried emotional meaning for the public. They reminded people of wartime broadcasts, jubilees, Christmas messages, and moments of national mourning. To see that same object on another royal, while the queen was still alive, might have felt premature to some observers. It could have suggested that an era was ending before it truly had. Within palace culture, such decisions are rarely debated openly. The monarch's word is final. The jeweler received the instruction. The item remained secured. The matter was not revisited. Over time, as the queen's health declined and the future of the monarchy became a topic of speculation, discussions about succession naturally increased. But even then, the symbolic boundaries remained intact. After the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, the landscape changed. Authority transitioned. Titles shifted. The monarchy entered a new chapter. With the accession of a new sovereign, the context surrounding royal jewelry inevitably evolved as well. Only after a reign concludes does the full redistribution of its symbols become possible. At that stage, jewels once associated with a specific monarch may reappear on successors, not as replacements but as continuations. The former royal jeweler emphasized that the monarchy survives through discipline in these matters. It is not random. It is not driven by personal preference alone. It is guided by an acute awareness of history. In the end, the story the jewel Camilla reportedly wanted is less about rivalry and more about restraint. Queen Elizabeth II did not need to explain her decision. Her authority was understood. Camilla did not publicly contest it. She continued her duties. The jewel remained where it had long rested, tied to a reign defined by endurance and continuity. What this episode reveals is how even the smallest elements within the monarchy carry profound significance. A necklace or brooch may appear decorative, but in royal terms, it can represent decades of service, identity, and memory. The British monarchy communicates through symbols as much as through speeches. It speaks through ceremony, through tradition, and sometimes through what is not worn. In refusing to release that particular piece during her lifetime, Queen Elizabeth II reinforced a principle she had upheld for 70 years. The crown endures by controlling its own narrative. Camilla's journey into the highest rank of royal life continued regardless. Over time, she established her own visual identity as queen consort. She selected pieces that complemented her role. She stepped into her responsibilities fully. But one jewel, associated so closely with a sovereign who defined an era, remained a symbol of a reign that would not be shared while it still lived. And in that quiet decision, the monarchy demonstrated once again that power is often expressed not in what is granted, but in what is carefully withheld. The history behind the jewel long before the reported inquiry was ever made, long before Camilla rose to the rank of queen consort, and long before questions of reassignment were quietly considered. The jewel itself had already lived an extraordinary life. Within the collections of the British royal family, certain pieces begin as gifts, others as commissions, and some as inheritances passed carefully from one generation to the next. This particular piece entered royal hands decades ago, during a period when Britain was redefining its place in a changing world. It was not simply purchased as decoration. It was acquired with purpose. Crafted by one of the great royal jewelers of its era, the design reflected restraint rather than extravagance. Its diamonds were selected not only for brilliance, but for clarity and symmetry. The setting balanced strength with elegance. Every detail reflected a philosophy that had come to define the modern British monarchy: visible dignity without unnecessary excess. When it was first worn publicly by Queen Elizabeth II, it did not immediately become iconic. At that stage of her reign, the Queen was still a young sovereign carrying immense responsibility. Over time, however, repetition transformed the jewel into something greater than its material value. It appeared during state banquets attended by world leaders. It was visible in official portraits distributed across Commonwealth nations. It shimmered beneath chandeliers at diplomatic receptions where alliances were strengthened not only through words, but through visual continuity. Gradually, the public began to associate the jewel not simply with formality, but with reassurance. It became part of the Queen's carefully constructed visual language. When citizens saw it, they recognized stability. When foreign dignitaries saw it, they recognized continuity. Unlike tiaras reserved for grand evening occasions, this piece possessed versatility. It could be worn in moments of celebration or solemnity. During anniversaries, jubilees, and times of national mourning, it appeared again and again. Each appearance layered meaning onto metal and stone. The royal archives recorded every instance: dates, locations, the names of visiting presidents and prime ministers. The jewel was there when speeches were delivered that addressed economic crises. It was there during commemorations of wartime sacrifice. It was present at celebrations marking decades of service. Because Queen Elizabeth II reigned for 70 years, repetition alone turned many objects into symbols. But this piece stood out. Courtiers noted how often it was selected for events of particular importance. It became part of the Queen's diplomatic armor, subtle but unmistakable. In royal tradition, some jewels rotate freely among senior women of the family. Others become anchored to a specific sovereign. The distinction is rarely written down in official manuals. It evolves through habit and association. Over decades, the public memory attaches certain items to certain faces. By the time Camilla entered royal life in an official capacity, this jewel had already accumulated half a century of visual history. It was no longer neutral. It carried decades of imagery deeply embedded in newspapers, television broadcasts, and official photographs. As Camilla's role within the monarchy expanded, she gained access to remarkable pieces from the royal collection. Many of them had rich histories of their own. Some had been worn by Queen Elizabeth II earlier in her reign, and then rotated to other royal women as circumstances changed. Others came from previous queens and consorts, offering continuity without direct overlap. But the piece most closely tied to Queen Elizabeth II remained consistently with her. Even as age limited her public appearances, she chose it for carefully selected engagements. Its presence reassured the public that the sovereign remained steady, even as the world transformed around her. The former royal jeweler explained that certain items develop what he described as visual ownership, not legal ownership, but symbolic ownership. Over time, it becomes almost unthinkable to imagine the piece on another person while the original wearer still lives. When discussions reportedly arose about reviewing archived pieces, the historical weight of this jewel made it particularly sensitive. It was not simply about craftsmanship or beauty. It was about narrative. The British monarchy survives through controlled narrative. It is an institution that blends heritage with adaptation. Every visual choice contributes to that balance. Introducing a piece so deeply connected to Queen Elizabeth II onto another royal figure during her lifetime might have disrupted that carefully managed continuity. The jewel's craftsmanship also added to its mystique. Its design reflected mid-20th century royal aesthetics. Clean lines, brilliant stones, and a setting engineered for durability. It had been reinforced and maintained across decades, ensuring it remained structurally sound for repeated wear. Royal jewelers do not merely polish stones. They preserve history. They inspect clasps, reinforce prongs, document repairs, and ensure that pieces capable of surviving centuries remain wearable. The care given to this particular jewel reinforced its importance. It was treated not as a decorative accessory, but as an artifact. When the Queen wore it during jubilees marking milestones of her reign, the symbolism intensified. It linked the present moment to earlier decades. Viewers could compare photographs separated by 30 or 40 years and see the same jewel reflecting light in nearly identical fashion. The continuity was intentional. As Camilla moved closer to the center of royal life, observers noted her gradual adoption of more historically significant pieces. This progression mirrored her evolving status. With each new appearance at major state events, she stepped more fully into the visual tradition of the monarchy. Yet certain boundaries remained invisible but firm. The jewel most strongly identified with Queen Elizabeth II was one such boundary. It represented a reign that was still ongoing. The jeweler later reflected that Queen Elizabeth II possessed extraordinary awareness of timing. She understood when to introduce change and when to preserve tradition untouched. Her reign spanned generations. She had seen prime ministers come and go, nations reshape alliances, and social expectations shift dramatically. Through all of it, she maintained a visual consistency that became synonymous with her identity. The jewel in question was part of that consistency. When the Queen declined to reassign it, the decision aligned perfectly with her lifelong approach. She had never rushed symbolic transitions. Even as succession plans were clear, she did not allow imagery to anticipate reality. For Camilla, whose path to royal acceptance required patience and resilience, the message was subtle but unmistakable. Status within the monarchy unfolds layer by layer. Some elements can be embraced immediately. Others are inherited only through time. The history of the jewel demonstrates how objects can transcend material value. Diamonds, gold, and craftsmanship are significant, but they are secondary to accumulated meaning. Over 70 years, this piece absorbed the milestones of a historic reign. After Queen Elizabeth II's passing, the context shifted. The monarchy entered a new chapter. Symbols that once belonged exclusively to one sovereign could, in time, reappear within a different framework. But during her lifetime, the jewel remained where it had always been, aligned with the Queen who had defined it. In examining its history, it becomes clear that the refusal was not about favoritism or rivalry. It was about stewardship. Queen Elizabeth II saw herself not as owner of the crown's treasures, but as guardian. Her duty was to preserve their significance for future generations. The jewel's journey from acquisition to iconic status reveals how carefully the British monarchy constructs its image. Every repetition, every appearance, every moment captured by cameras contributed to its symbolic weight. By the time Camilla reportedly expressed interest, the piece was no longer just a beautiful object resting in a vault. It was a chapter of history in physical form. And history, within the monarchy, is never transferred lightly. Camilla's long road to legitimacy before she ever became queen consort, before titles were adjusted and public approval shifted, Camilla occupied one of the most complicated positions in modern royal history. Her relationship with the heir to the throne unfolded under intense scrutiny. In the early years, public opinion was unforgiving. Loyalty to Princess Diana remained strong and emotional. The monarchy itself faced one of the most turbulent periods of the late 20th century. For Camilla, entry into the formal structure of the British royal family was not immediate. It was gradual, cautious, and deliberately understated. There were no dramatic introductions into the center of royal ceremony. Instead, there was patience. When she married the future king, the language around her role was carefully chosen. She did not assume the title Princess of Wales out of respect for Diana's enduring public image. That decision alone signaled an awareness of symbolism and sensitivity to perception. Over the years that followed, Camilla took on charitable work steadily. Literacy initiatives, support for victims of domestic violence, and cultural patronages became part of her public identity. She appeared beside the then Prince of Wales at official engagements, foreign tours, and state events. Acceptance did not happen overnight. It came through repetition and consistency. The public saw her year after year, fulfilling duties without theatrical displays. Gradually, hostility softened into tolerance, and tolerance into measured approval. Within palace walls, legitimacy is not granted by headlines. It is built through adherence to protocol. Camilla learned the rhythms of royal life, the careful scheduling, the diplomatic phrasing, the silent endurance required during public ceremonies. As Queen Elizabeth II advanced in age, questions about the future of the monarchy became more visible. The institution needed continuity. It needed stability. In a carefully worded message marking her Platinum Jubilee, Queen Elizabeth II expressed her sincere wish that Camilla would be known as Queen Consort when the time came. That endorsement carried immense weight. It was not merely a courtesy. It was a signal to the nation and the Commonwealth that Camilla's role had been accepted at the highest level. From that moment, Camilla's position transformed. The path that had once been uncertain became constitutionally defined. She was no longer navigating the margins of royal identity. She was preparing to stand at the center of it. Yet legitimacy within the monarchy operates on multiple levels. There is legal legitimacy, there is public legitimacy, and there is symbolic legitimacy. Legal status changed the day the new reign began. Public acceptance had been evolving for years. Symbolic legitimacy, however, unfolds through imagery, ceremony, and the inheritance of visual tradition. This is where the question of royal jewelry intersects with Camilla's journey. As her responsibilities expanded, so did the significance of the pieces she wore. Each tiara chosen for a state banquet, each brooch selected for a diplomatic reception, communicated something subtle. Observers who follow royal tradition understand that jewelry often reflects rank and moment. When Camilla appeared in historically important pieces from the royal collection, it signaled trust. It demonstrated that she was stepping into a role shaped by generations of queens and consorts. But there are layers even within that progression. Some jewels rotate among senior royal women without controversy. Others carry such a strong personal association with a reigning monarch that transferring them prematurely could feel symbolic of succession itself. Camilla's long road to legitimacy meant she understood these nuances. She had witnessed firsthand how perception can shape destiny within the monarchy. She knew that timing mattered. The reported interest in the jewel most closely associated with Queen Elizabeth II did not arise in isolation. It came at a moment when Camilla's role was strengthening, when her public identity was transitioning from consort in waiting to future queen. In ordinary institutions, ambition is often expressed directly. In monarchy, ambition must be invisible. Advancement happens through duty fulfilled, not demands made. Camilla's journey required endurance. She endured years of criticism. She endured comparison. She endured the weight of public memory that refused to fade quickly. Over time, however, her steady presence altered the narrative. When she ultimately became queen consort, it was not through spectacle. It was through succession, through the established order of the crown, through constitutional inevitability. Yet even then, the shadow of Queen Elizabeth II's historic reign remained immense. 70 years of continuity had created an almost immovable standard. Any successor stepping into prominence would inevitably be compared to that legacy. The jewel in question symbolized more than beauty. It symbolized that 70-year reign. To wear it while the queen still lived might have appeared as stepping into a visual space not yet vacated. Camilla's legitimacy was built on patience. She had learned that within the monarchy, some doors open only with time. Her ascent was gradual by design. Abrupt symbolic shifts would have contradicted the careful strategy that had guided her acceptance. The British monarchy depends on seamless transition. It must appear inevitable rather than disruptive. Every gesture is calibrated to avoid the impression of rivalry between generations. Queen Elizabeth II understood this deeply. Camilla, through experience, can understand as well. The refusal to reassign the jewel did not undermine Camilla's status. Instead, it reinforced the principle that certain symbols remain tied to a sovereign until the natural end of a reign. After the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, the monarchy entered a new phase. The visual identity of the crown began to adjust accordingly. As queen consort, Camilla assumed her place within that evolving imagery. Her long road to legitimacy had prepared her for precisely that moment. She had learned to navigate criticism, to respect tradition, and to accept that within royal life, timing defines everything. What her journey reveals is that legitimacy inside the monarchy is rarely seized. It is absorbed gradually. It is earned through visibility balanced with restraint. By the time she stood beside the new king, her role was secure. The years of patience had positioned her firmly within the institution. And yet, even at the height of her elevation, the memory of Queen Elizabeth II's reign remained powerful. Symbols attached to that era could not be separated lightly. Camilla's story is therefore not one of denial, but of progression. She moved from controversy to constitutional recognition through steady service. The jewel remained a boundary during the Queen's lifetime, not because Camilla lacked legitimacy, but because some symbols belong to a reign, not merely to a role. In the British monarchy, identity is shaped as much by what is deferred as by what is embraced. Camilla's long road proves that within this ancient institution, endurance often speaks louder than entitlement. The Queen's strategy of symbolism throughout her 70-year reign, Queen Elizabeth II mastered a language that required no translation. It was the language of symbolism. She rarely explained her decisions publicly. She did not need to. Her choices were expressed through ceremony, posture, timing, and carefully selected objects. Among those objects, jewelry played a subtle but powerful role. For Queen Elizabeth II, symbolism was never accidental. It was strategic. Every brooch worn on a state visit could acknowledge a host nation. Every tiara chosen for a banquet could reflect continuity with a previous generation. Even color choices in clothing were deliberate, ensuring visibility in crowds while reinforcing consistency. The monarchy survives not through force, but through perception. The Queen understood that her image represented stability in a rapidly changing world. Over decades marked by political upheaval, cultural transformation, and global uncertainty, she remained visually constant. Jewelry became part of that constancy. Certain pieces rotated among senior royal women, but others became unmistakably hers. Through repetition, she transformed objects into emblems of her reign. When the public saw specific jewels, they did not merely see diamonds or gemstones. They saw the Queen. This strategy was not vanity. It was institutional discipline. The British royal family depends on continuity. Symbols anchor that continuity. By wearing the same pieces at significant moments, she built visual memory across generations. Images of her early reign, captured in black and white photographs, often show the same jewels that appeared decades later in high-definition broadcasts. That repetition created reassurance. It signaled that while governments changed and eras shifted, the crown remained steady. Within this framework, certain items became inseparable from her personal authority. They were worn during meetings with world leaders, including figures from across political divides. They were present during jubilees marking milestones of service. They appeared in official portraits that would later define history textbooks. The reported refusal to release one of those deeply associated pieces fits precisely within her long-established approach. Queen Elizabeth II never rushed transition. Even as succession plans were clear and constitutional procedures defined, she avoided symbolic gestures that might imply abdication of presence. Authority, for her, was not shared through imagery before its time. When discussions reportedly included the possibility of that jewel being worn by Camilla, the decision to keep it reserved reflected a principle she had applied throughout her reign. Symbols must align with reality. As long as she remained sovereign, certain visual elements remained exclusively tied to her. The Queen had witnessed the abdication crisis of her uncle through family memory. She had observed how fragile perception could be. From the moment she ascended the throne in 1952, she committed herself to reinforcing the permanence of her role. Part of that permanence was visual continuity. She did not dramatically alter her style. She refined it. She maintained a recognizable silhouette. She favored pearls, structured coats, and consistent presentation. Jewelry fit within that disciplined framework. The jewel in question had appeared during defining chapters of her reign. It had been present during anniversaries, celebrating decades of service. It had accompanied her during moments of national reflection. Its association with her was not incidental. It was cumulative. Allowing another royal to wear it during her lifetime could have created ambiguity. It might have suggested transition before transition formally occurred. For a monarch who valued clarity, ambiguity was something to be managed carefully. Her strategy extended beyond personal presentation. It shaped how the monarchy moved through change. When younger generations took on greater responsibilities, it happened gradually. Duties increased. Visibility expanded. But the Queen's central symbolism remained intact. She understood the emotional attachment many citizens felt toward her reign. In times of crisis, people often turned to her Christmas broadcasts or Jubilee appearances for reassurance. The visual consistency of those appearances reinforced that emotional bond. The jewel's continued association with her supported that stability. It became part of a recognizable pattern. Remove it prematurely, and the pattern shifts. This was not about withholding status from Camilla. By the time the reported inquiry occurred, the Queen had already publicly expressed her support for Camilla's future title as Queen Consort. That endorsement demonstrated trust and institutional backing. But endorsement of future role did not require immediate transfer of present symbols. Queen Elizabeth II approached succession as a process, not an event. The moment of transition would come naturally through constitutional reality. Only then would certain visual emblems be free to evolve in meaning. Throughout history, monarchies have fallen when symbolism and reality drift apart. The Queen's reign endured because she aligned them carefully. She never allowed imagery to outpace authority. The royal jeweler who recounted the story observed that her decisions were rarely emotional in outward expression. They were measured, considered, rooted in understanding how even small gestures could ripple outward. Inside palace protocol, a simple directive is enough. There is no need for confrontation. When she determined that the jewel would remain unassigned, that decision concluded the matter. Her strategy also protected Camilla. Had the jewel appeared on another royal while the Queen was still alive, media interpretation might have framed it as replacement rather than continuity. By keeping certain symbols intact, she prevented unnecessary comparison. In this way, restraint functioned as protection for both the institution and its members. The Queen's mastery of symbolism extended to her final years. Even as her public appearances became less frequent, she selected moments carefully. When she did appear, the consistency of her image reassured the nation that the crown remained anchored. Objects can outlive individuals, but their meanings shift depending on context. Queen Elizabeth II ensured that the meanings attached to her most significant jewels remained clear until the end of her reign. After her passing, the symbolism inevitably changed. The monarchy entered a new chapter. Items once associated solely with her could acquire renewed context under a different sovereign. But during her lifetime, clarity was paramount. Her strategy demonstrates that monarchy is sustained not only through constitutional law, but through disciplined imagery. It is sustained through an awareness that even a single jewel can speak volumes. Queen Elizabeth II spoke rarely about such matters. Yet through decades of deliberate choices, she demonstrated that symbolism, when handled carefully, becomes one of the strongest pillars of enduring authority. The jewel remained hers not because of sentimentality, but because of strategy. And strategy in her reign was inseparable from stability. Inside the royal vault, beneath the public ceremonies, beneath the glittering state banquets and carefully staged balcony appearances, there exists a quieter world within the British royal family. It is a world of controlled temperatures, detailed catalogs, reinforced security, and disciplined preservation. It is where history rests when it is not being worn. The royal vault is not a single dramatic chamber filled with scattered treasure. It is an organized archive. Every significant piece of jewelry is documented, photographed, assessed, and maintained according to strict standards. Access is limited. Movement is recorded. Nothing enters or leaves without authorization. For decades, the former royal jeweler worked within that system. His role was not only to polish gemstones or repair clasps. He functioned as a guardian of continuity. Each item he handled carried weight beyond its material value. The jewel at the center of quiet discussion was stored like all others, secured, cushioned, protected from light exposure and humidity. Yet even in storage, it stood apart. Its file was thicker, its photographic record more extensive. The number of recorded appearances far exceeded that of most comparable pieces. Within the vault, hierarchy exists just as it does above ground. Some items are rarely worn, preserved primarily for heritage. Others rotate, frequently among senior royal women. A small number, however, are effectively anchored to a specific sovereign for the duration of a reign. This particular jewel had become one of those anchors for Queen Elizabeth II. Whenever a major state event approached, selections would be discussed. Protocol teams reviewed the nature of the occasion. Diplomatic considerations were weighed. Historical symbolism was evaluated. The Queen often made the final choice herself, drawing from decades of instinct. When a piece was requested from the vault, procedures were precise. Gloves were worn. Condition reports were updated. Insurance documentation reflected temporary movement. After an event concluded, the item was returned, inspected again, and carefully restored to its designated location. The system relied on predictability. That is why any inquiry involving a heavily symbolic piece drew immediate attention. When Camilla's representatives reportedly requested a review of archived items for possible future use, the process began routinely. Lists were examined. Files were pulled. Historical notes were checked. But the moment the jeweler saw that particular item included among those under consideration, he understood that this was not routine. Inside the vault, symbolism is visible through paperwork as much as through gemstones. Frequency aware reveals significance. Event descriptions reveal context. A pattern emerges over time. That pattern made it clear that this jewel was not simply available for reassignment without careful thought. Within palace operations, nothing moves casually. Even the possibility of reassignment required clarity from the highest authority. Word reached the Queen. The response was simple and definitive. The piece would remain reserved. Inside the vault, the decision meant no change in procedure. The jewel continued to rest in its allocated compartment. Its status did not shift. But among those who understood the subtleties of royal symbolism, the message was unmistakable. The vault itself represents more than storage. It represents stewardship. Unlike private collections that may be sold or divided, the majority of royal jewels are held in trust. They belong not to an individual monarch personally, but to the crown as an institution. This distinction is crucial. A reigning sovereign may wear a piece repeatedly, but it does not become private property in the conventional sense. It remains part of a broader historical narrative. That is why transfer of symbolic items must align with constitutional transition. During the lifetime of a monarch, certain pieces function almost as extensions of sovereign identity. They return to the vault only to await the next appearance by that same sovereign. The jeweler later reflected that working inside the vault provided a unique perspective on monarchy itself. Above ground, the public sees ceremony. Below ground, one sees continuity measured in ledgers and preservation techniques. The jewel associated so closely with Queen Elizabeth II carried the imprint of 70 years of disciplined use. Its prongs have been reinforced across decades. Its settings inspected repeatedly to ensure durability under heavy lighting and long appearances. Each maintenance entry told a story: a jubilee celebration, a diplomatic reception, a state opening, a commemorative service. The jewel had traveled across continents. It had been photographed thousands of times. Its image was embedded in collective memory. For Camilla, whose access to the vault expanded as her status evolved, the experience would have underscored both privilege and boundary. To stand within that archive is to see history not as abstraction, but as tangible weight. As queen consort, she would eventually inherit the right to wear pieces of immense significance. But inheritance follows chronology. It does not precede it. Inside the vault, chronology is visible. Items associated with previous queens are labeled accordingly. When one reign ends, records shift subtly. Context updates. Descriptions expand to reflect historical closure. But until that closure occurs, the reigning monarch's most emblematic items remain tied to her. The refusal to reassign the jewel was therefore not an emotional reaction. It was procedural consistency aligned with symbolic strategy. The vault does not respond to public opinion. It responds to authority. And during Queen Elizabeth II's lifetime, Her authority defined which pieces remained exclusively hers. After her passing, procedures would naturally evolve. Files would be updated to reflect the conclusion of her reign. The jewel's description would now include its complete historical arc under her stewardship. Only then could its symbolism expand beyond a single sovereign. Inside the royal vault, time moves differently. It is measured not in headlines or controversies, but in reigns. Objects wait patiently. They do not rush transition. They endure. The story of the jewel Camilla, reportedly wanted, cannot be understood without recognizing this environment. It was never simply about desire. It was about the disciplined system that governs the crown's most visible treasures. In that system, timing is everything. And until the moment of constitutional change arrived, the jewel remained exactly what a queen intended it to remain: preserved, protected, and inseparable from the reign that defined it. The line between royal and reign monarchy operates on distinctions that are rarely spoken aloud but always understood. One of the most important of those distinctions is the difference between role and reign. A role can be assigned. A reign must unfold. When Camilla moved steadily toward the highest formal rank beside the sovereign, her role expanded visibly. Her responsibilities increased. Her presence at state occasions became more prominent. Her name was spoken with greater constitutional clarity. But during the lifetime of Queen Elizabeth II, there was only one reign. That distinction shaped everything. Inside the British royal family, hierarchy is not about personality. It is about structure. The sovereign embodies the crown. Others support it. Even the most senior consort does not visually mirror the reigning monarch, while that monarch still lives. This is why symbolism becomes delicate. As Camilla's legitimacy strengthened publicly, her visual identity evolved accordingly. She began wearing more historically significant pieces. She appeared at increasingly important state functions. Her proximity to the center of power became unmistakable. Yet no matter how elevated her role became, it did not convert into shared symbolism of reign. Queen Elizabeth II had built her reign across 7 decades. That reign had a visual signature. The jewels she wore repeatedly became part of that signature. They were not just ornaments. They were markers of authority. To introduce one of her most closely associated pieces onto another royal figure, while she remained sovereign, would have blurred that line. Monarchies depend on clarity of authority. Even subtle confusion can invite speculation. If a jewel deeply embedded in the public memory of Queen Elizabeth II suddenly appeared on Camilla, commentary would inevitably follow. Was it symbolic transition? Was it preparation? Was it quiet acknowledgement of shifting power? Such interpretations, even if inaccurate, carry weight. Queen Elizabeth II understood the power of imagery. She knew that her reign would one day conclude, but she did not allow its visual language to be diluted prematurely. For Camilla, the line between role and reign required patience. She had already demonstrated endurance across decades. Her acceptance into the heart of royal life had not come easily. She understood that every advancement must feel natural, not accelerated. When the reported refusal occurred, it reinforced that boundary without confrontation. There was no public denial, no visible tension, only the preservation of symbolic order. Inside palace tradition, that preservation is paramount. The sovereign's reign defines the era. Even heirs apparent do not adopt its strongest symbols before succession. The continuity of monarchy depends on clear succession rather than overlapping authority. Throughout history, moments of perceived rivalry within royal families have destabilized institutions. The British monarchy has survived in part because it avoids such ambiguity. By reserving certain visual elements exclusively for herself, Queen Elizabeth II protected that clarity. Camilla's rise to queen consort was already assured constitutionally. When the transition eventually came, it would be formal, unmistakable, and complete. At that point, new symbolism could emerge organically. But during the queen's lifetime, restraint communicated respect for hierarchy. The jewel became a quiet symbol of that restraint. It represented the difference between preparing for a future reign and inhabiting the present one. In many ways, Camilla's strength within the monarchy came from understanding timing. Her path required her to wait. She waited for a public sentiment to soften. She waited for a formal endorsement. She waited for a constitutional change. The line between role and reign is invisible to casual observers, but to those inside the institution, it defines every decision. Queen Elizabeth II had spent her life ensuring that the crown appeared unbroken. She did not abdicate symbolism in fragments. She carried it fully until the end. Camilla, as consort, supported that continuity rather than challenging it. The reported episode involving the jewel highlights a fundamental truth about monarchy. Succession is an event, but transition of symbolism is a process controlled carefully. When the queen passed, the line shifted instantly. Authority transferred. Titles changed. A new reign began. Only then could certain visual associations evolve without confusion. Until that moment, the distinction remained firm. Role may expand gradually. Reign remained singular. The jewel stayed with the sovereign not because of sentiment alone, but because it visually embodied the reign itself. And in monarchy, reign is never shared before its time.